Hello, everyone. It is 3:10, so we're going to get started with the CCOM-OE Seminar. So we have Dr. Lindsay Dubbs here today. She is the Associate Director of the North Carolina Renewable Ocean Energy Program, NCROEP, at the Coastal Studies Institute in Wanchese, North Carolina, and an Associate Research Professor with the Institute for the Environment at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dubbs leads environmental assessment and permitting aspects of the NCROEP, where her research focuses on Gulf Stream ecology and ecological impact assessment associated with marine renewable energy. For UNC Chapel Hill, Dubbs co-directs the Outer Banks Field Site, a semester-long undergraduate program focused on integrated science and policy approaches to the sustainable management of coastal resources. She developed and teaches undergraduate classes in coastal ecology and research methods, as well as coastal and offshore energy classes for both undergraduate and graduate students. Dubbs holds a bachelor's in biology and environmental studies from Tufts University, and a master's and a PhD in environmental sciences and engineering from the Gilling School of Global Public Health at UNC Chapel Hill. So thank you so much for joining us today, Lindsay. For questions, we ask that everyone please hold off until the end of the seminar, and you can either directly unmute yourself or you can type your questions into the chat and I will read them aloud. So Dr. Lindsay Dubbs, you can please share your screen and present.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Nicole. Hopefully I can do it faster this time than I did it last time. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Great. So thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about my work as the lead for permitting environmental assessment for the NCROEP. The approach that I have taken to fulfill this role is to conduct an integrative and as holistic as possible ecological assessment of the marine environment off the coast of North Carolina, considering changes that might be introduced by marine renewable energy development. And the approach I've taken stems from my background in ecosystem ecology, and it's led to a lot of collaborative projects. A lot of what I'm presenting today isn't necessarily in my area of expertise, but luckily I have great colleagues to work with. So first, let me tell you a little bit about the North Carolina Renewable Ocean Energy Program. It is a state marine energy program that established a partnership by the Coastal Studies Institute, the North Carolina and the engineering schools at North Carolina State University, North Carolina Agricultural and Technical University, and the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And you can see that those are spread across the state of North Carolina. The mission of our program is to conduct research to conceptualize, design, construct, operate, and market new and innovative technologies, harnessing marine energy in a way to fulfill some of the energy needs of our state and create jobs and economic opportunities. Our program is focused on marine hydrokinetic energy, or the movement of water in waves, tidal currents, ocean currents, and thermal gradients. I'm really proud to say that one of our priorities is holistic environmental assessments for developing regulatory guidelines for the responsible harnessing of this ocean energy. So 10 years ago, I started by asking these questions. What changes will marine energy development introduce to the marine environment? What elements of the marine environment off the North Carolina coast are especially sensitive and important? And what is the distribution of those elements in time and space? At that point, no one had yet characterized the marine energy resources off the North Carolina coast. So we weren't really sure what types of devices we were talking about. And we still don't really know what types of devices we're talking about. And that's because there is such a wide diversity of devices. You've probably seen these figures before, but as animations. Unfortunately, the animations were crashing my program today. So I had to just use the static images, but you see a couple of different wave energy technologies here on the bottom, an oscillating water column, an oscillating surge converter, and a point absorber. And then we see a tidal gate and a for harnessing tidal currents, and also a ocean current device. So this barge actually has large turbines located underneath it. And this Magellanus unit has been tested at EMIC now at a 2 megawatt scale. So we don't really know what we're talking about when we talk about marine energy development off the coast of North Carolina or anywhere, but we do know that with any sort of marine energy development, there will be an introduction of structures, moving components, mooring lines and transmission cables, and increased vessel traffic. And these introductions can alter the marine environment in many ways that are listed here. So there can be habitat that's created and displace other types of habitat. There can be changes in hydrodynamics that result in scour or that result in changes in nutrient dynamics like upwelling. Moving components as well as increased vessel traffic can increase the likelihood of strike of organisms and can also introduce additional noise into the marine environment. Moving components also mean an energy reduction in anything downstream from the devices that are harnessing that energy. And mooring lines, depending on how they are put in place, can cause an entanglement risk, and transmission cables can emit electromagnetic fields. Now, the implications of those changes really depend on the organisms that are in the vicinity of the developments, the scale of the developments, and the existing human uses of the development areas. For instance, if you're in a really heavily used area, there's probably already a lot of noise and vessel traffic in the first place. So simultaneously, we set out to define sensitive and important elements of the marine environment off of our coast, and we identified protected species like marine mammals, the bottlenose dolphin that you see on the left, and sea turtles that you see on the right. Highly migratory fish species, including those that are commercially important and protected, as well as recreational and commercial fisheries, which are culturally and economically important here in North Carolina. We also identified that sargassum, an important and protected brown macroalgae that is an ecosystem itself, accumulates along the western edge of the Gulf Stream, and that western edge of the Gulf Stream can be as close as 15 nautical miles from the easternmost point of North Carolina at the tip of Cape Hatteras. And we also identified the processes that affect the productivity and diversity of the Gulf Stream and pelagic ocean off of our coast. So to understand the distribution of the sensitive elements in existing human uses, we compiled geospatial information to create an atlas of ecologically sensitive areas and existing human uses. And I did this with a team of researchers who had just done a similar exercise for offshore wind off the coast of North Carolina. And some of the areas or the concerns were similar, but some of them were different. So when we were looking at human uses, we weren't as concerned about anything that was extending out of the water column into the airspace for this marine hydrokinetic energy mapping exercise. So on the left, you see some of those ecologically important areas, some of the capes and the estuarine system. There are some areas in green that are referred to as the point, where we see an accumulation of fish and birds. There are some hard bottom areas that are really important habitat for different fish species. And we also have a lot of artificial reefs and wrecks off of our coast that serve as an important habitat that's generally avoided with any offshore development. And you can also see in red, this is kind of the 90% confidence interval of the location of the western edge of the Gulf Stream. So that was identified as well. And as far as human use conflicts, it's probably pretty similar to the coast of New Hampshire, where we have some shipping lanes, some recreational uses like diving, and a national marine sanctuary. So our environmental assessment happened in tandem with resource assessments at those very early stages of our program. And through that resource assessment, we decided to focus on some of the most promising resources that we have off of our coast. And the Gulf Stream was one of those that you saw. And so we have been making measurements of the Gulf Stream current and also of some environmental variables right here on the continental shelf slope at a North Carolina Renewable Ocean Energy Program instrument mooring. We also have a wave energy test site here at Jeanette's Pier, which is a state fishing pier with whom Coastal Studies Institute has a research agreement. However, we found that many of the federal efforts to characterize the offshore environment for renewable energy planning largely end at the continental shelf, which can be seen here in this map showing data layers collected by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management for the marine cadastre. Similarly, publications and geospatial data sets of tagged or cited organisms largely are spotty for the western edge of the Gulf Stream eastward, away from the coast of North Carolina and into the Pelagic Ocean. So this lack of ecological information about this region we kind of focused on filling some of the gaps in knowledge for that region initially. And we held a workshop for researchers who do ecological research in the Gulf Stream in 2019. And we felt very justified in that decision because they agreed that there was very little information about the ecological significance and use of that area. So a lot of the work that I'm going to tell you about here today is the work, some of the projects that my collaborators and I have worked on to better understand the ecology of the Gulf Stream environment. Oops. We utilize expertise and tools across spatial scales. We are working with numerical modelers and satellite imagery analysis to look at this regional and ocean basin scale. We've been doing observations at the mesoscale of sea turtles, of marine mammals, and sargassum. And then we've also been doing some microscale analyses, including biogeochemical experiments and analysis of algal communities. And this has allowed us to identify gaps in knowledge about the spatial and temporal distribution of marine organisms of the Gulf Stream and collect data to fill some of those identified gaps, as well as explore relationships between those different ecosystem elements and controls on productivity, function, and distribution of ecosystem components. And in doing that, it's also allowed us, when considering some of the experiments that have been done by others, to look at the impacts of energy harnessing, what the impacts might be on the organisms and ecosystems off of our coast. So conceptual ecosystem models are one of the ways that we've really tried to identify what our gaps in knowledge are. And you see here on the right an excerpt from a qualitative model, conceptual model, that shows the Gulf Stream ecosystem structure and processes. And the little circles that you can't see very well here contain summaries of what we know about the relationships between different ecosystem elements. This conceptual framework allows us to consider all of the ecosystem elements and processes and the relationships with each other, as well as the services that they provide to humans, and how different uses of resources, including space and energy, cause trade-offs in services. So currently, this is a qualitative decision support tool that was created primarily by my colleague, Linda Dana, but we hope to make some elements of this conceptual model quantitative over time as we're collecting more information. And so this is kind of a scaled up version of that model to an ecosystem service cascade model. The model allows one to conceptualize trade-offs between different ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are the benefits that humans derive from our environment and its function. So this particular example is about fish production. And that fish production provides many benefits to humans, including food, recreation, and a lot of other abstract benefits. The benefits in turn provide values that include market and non-market values associated with food and recreation. And the values, as well as other elements of the cascade model, inform institutions and are the basis for human judgment that guides decisions that in turn influence structure and processes, services, and values. Dr. Dana is considering a handful of ecosystem services in the context of how marine hydrokinetic energy installations may impact structures and processes within the ecosystem that would impact the provision of individual ecosystem services. And this exercise has been great for illuminating gaps in our knowledge about the Gulf Stream. We ask the question, how do the sensitive organisms we've identified even use the Gulf Stream? Would they come in contact with Gulf Stream turbines, depending on where they're located in the water column? What processes are instrumental to productivity and diversity in this region and in the whole ocean basin? And also, how noisy is it? Answering this question is really important to consider since many marine organisms, especially marine mammals, rely on auditory cues for long-range communication. So the background soundscape is very important when we think about changes to the environment. And so as far as projects, the next project that I'll move on to is kind of addressing that how noisy is it question. So one of our projects is passive acoustic monitoring, and this is being done from a hydrophone that is located in this pod, this mooring that I mentioned earlier. We are using this passive acoustic monitoring to characterize the soundscape and especially the anthropogenic sounds, to inventory marine mammals, and to start to explore the relationship between vocalizations and the position of the Gulf Stream. And we can do this because the hydrophone is co-located with an ADCP and a CTD. So we can compare vocalizations to overlying current speeds and directions, as well as water temperatures. The hydrophone that we have deployed here, flipping it for the past few years, is a ARL M2, and it records for the first 5 minutes of every half an hour. And then we take those large data sets, and they've been automatically analyzed using Silbato to detect whistles, SWIP-WEP to detect quacks, and we will be moving on to baleen whale vocalizations using PAMGuard pretty soon. So what we've learned so far from the soundscape analysis, we've looked at long-term average sound spectra by season of each year of the data set. And what you're looking at here is a sound pressure level, or how loud it is, and the frequency, giving you that sound spectra, going from 10 hertz up to 10,000 hertz, or 10 kilohertz. So this is the sound spectra for spring of 2016. And the statistics include the median for the season and the 10 and 90% percentiles. In blue, you can see data from one of the windiest times during this spring 2016 record, and also an instance where our boat passed overhead. So when we look at all of these sound spectra by season, we see very little difference by variability between seasons. And we see that the boat passing overhead, keep in mind this is at 20 meters depth, does exceed that 90% sound pressure level across all frequencies, but the wind pretty much stays within that 90th percentile. Even though that boat noise is so loud down at this depth, we found that anthropogenic noise at this site exceeds the loudest natural noise less than 10% of the time. So this is a very quiet location. My colleague has also found through some analysis of the CTD and the ADCP data that there seem to be some several different SOFAR channels where sound travels faster and further than elsewhere. So introducing sound into those SOFAR channels could have much broader effects than if we avoided a SOFAR channel. As I said, we are also looking at the absence and presence of marine mammals. And these figures show the fraction of recording intervals with greater than 3 seconds of whistling or greater than 1 quack. And we see that marine mammals are present year-round, although they are most abundant kind of in the summer months and also from late fall to early winter. The marine mammal generated whistles and quacks, as I said, were found throughout the year. And if you're wondering who makes whistles, they are typically made by toothed whales, and quacks have been attributed to dolphins and minke whales. We've not really determined the species responsible for either vocalization in our recordings, but we do know that bottlenose dolphins, like that which is pictured here, have been observed year-round within the study area. And as I said, we're starting to look at how these vocalizations match up with the physical oceanographic variables. So these data are from the January 22nd, 2015 to April 1st, 2015 cruise. So you're looking at time series. They're all the same on all of these figures, excuse me. The top panel shows the along stream velocity. So if you were to cut the current in half and look at kind of a cross section of it, this is the cross-sectional velocity right above the mooring with depth as a function of depth. And the blue colors are slower moving waters and the warmer colors are the fast moving waters. So you can see the Gulf Stream jet here in the dark red. In this figure, in the second figure, you see the vertical integral of the along stream velocity, so kind of averaged velocity. The third panel shows the number of marine mammal whistles per 5-minute increment. So per 5-minute increment is on the y-axis. And the fourth panel shows the time series of the bottom temperature. So from this figure, if you had a lot of time to look at it, I'll try and point things out to you because you don't, I know. You can see that the Gulf Stream is alternatingly over the mooring, which are depicted in red, or further offshore, depicted in blue. So the Gulf Stream is meandering over that mooring. And when the vocalization metric is high, like those that you see depicted in these blue lines, the Gulf Stream is further offshore, whereas the converse, shown here in gray, is not consistently true. And when we compare the high and low vocalization subsets, high is more likely when the bottom water is cooler and fresher. So we don't have a very large data set to look at here. We've unfortunately had a couple of data losses for various reasons over the past few years. But this leads us to think that maybe these marine mammals are shifting offshore with the western edge of the Gulf Stream closer to our mooring. And that's not surprising, because a lot of marine organisms move with fronts like the Gulf Stream current. And pretty soon, hopefully in the next couple of days, we will be retrieving another hydrophone, and hopefully that data set is intact so that we have another winter data set with which to test this hypothesis. Okay, now moving on to a project about sea turtles. We are interested in learning more about how sea turtles are using the Gulf Stream environment. And we've done this in collaboration with colleagues at NOAA primarily, and also with Kate Mansfield from University of Central Florida, the North Carolina Aquariums, and the Northeast Sea Turtle Cooperative. So one way that we did this was we put observers on seasonal cruises, hoping that we would capture and be able to tag a adult turtle while we were there. We were not successful in that pursuit. And then we also tagged and tracked juvenile and adult loggerheads. As far as observers on the seasonal cruise, even though we didn't succeed in capturing any turtles to tag, we did observe green, loggerhead, and leatherback sea turtles on several of the cruises. And my colleague Larissa here in this picture is holding one of the captured post-hatchling loggerhead sea turtles associated with sargassum that we captured on one of the cruises in September. And we captured actually 4 loggerheads on that cruise, and one of them we were able to take a skin sample from to do a stable isotope analysis to look at the trophic ecology of these juvenile sea turtles. With the tagging and tracking program, we collected 5 post-hatchling loggerhead sea turtles and reared them in captivity till they were the size that we could tag them with solar PTT tags, satellite tags, and those were attached in May of 2017, and we released those sea turtles into the Gulf Stream. And what we found from those satellite tag data can be shown in this, or is shown in this animation. And so you might notice that the sea turtles are staying off of the continental shelf, away from the higher density of predators there. The tags stopped transmitting in July of 2017. The turtles also stayed within the Gulf Stream current and quickly reoriented to stay within the primary current when they broke off in warm core rings. And some of the data from the tags, including their charge levels and their temperatures relative to the surrounding ocean temperatures, gave us information that told us that they stayed at the sea surface and that they stayed associated with sargassum. And we're sharing all of this information with a marine animal meta-analysis and also with seaturtle.org. And this is very similar to the findings of Kate Mansfield, who originally tagged these turtles in Florida, but we're seeing similar patterns for turtles released from North Carolina. As I said, we had tags for tagging larger turtles, but we never managed to capture any of them in the Gulf Stream, and we were afraid that our batteries were dying, so we wanted to collect some information about loggerheads. So we partnered with the Northeast Sea Turtle Cooperative, and they tagged some turtles off the coast of Massachusetts, and those sea turtles ended up on the continental, those adult loggerheads ended up off the coast of North Carolina on the continental shelf in October 2019, which is similar to that, the route of many of the adult loggerheads tagged by that sea turtle cooperative. They did, in one instance, Samir Patel shared with me, find that one of their tagged turtles actually went off the coast of Massachusetts directly into the Gulf Stream in one instance. So again, we're learning a little bit more about how these marine organisms are using this Gulf Stream environment, confirming that the patterns of use are similar to that which has been recorded in other areas of the North Atlantic. And the final project that I'm going to tell you a little bit about are these seasonal cruises to make fine scale measurements and do experiments on samples brought back to the lab to investigate processes that are influencing nutrient cycling and primary production in the Gulf Stream. So we monitor water quality characteristics, phytoplankton biomass, and community composition, and sargassum presence and rates of productivity and nutrient cycling. And this map shows the sampling locations over 21 seasonal cruises to areas of the Gulf Stream with and without sargassum. We have over a 5-year data set at this point. And the different colors of these diamonds shows the different seasons. So these black diamonds are winter. We have far few winter seasonal cruises than other seasonal cruises, in part because we used to think that sargassum wasn't found off of our coasts in the winter, which is not true. And in part because it's more difficult to get offshore in the winter months. So some of the fine scale measurements have really focused on sargassum, sargassum productivity, and also phytoplankton and algae, epiphytic algae productivity. Sargassum is itself a primary producer, fixing carbon and assimilating inorganic nutrients into biomass that then is available for consumers at higher trophic levels. And it has a lot of surfaces, as you can kind of see here, and you can see a lot better in this close-up image of it. And those surfaces provide substrate for epiphytic organisms, including algae. So we've also observed that there is a consistently higher phytoplankton biomass associated with sargassum than surrounding Gulf Stream waters. And the community composition of those phytoplankton, like this diatom that's shown here, is different from that of the epiphytic community. So we sample for the community composition of the epiphytes and of the plankton. And we have done analysis 3 different ways. We were originally looking at algal pigments because different algal groups, large algal groups, have different pigments associated with them. So we can group the different community compositions very roughly in that way. And then we moved on to microscopy analysis, and now we are also including genetic analysis to identify the algal species associated with sargassum, with the surrounding Gulf Stream waters where sargassum is absent, and also those epiphytic algae. We find that the waters associated with sargassum is dominated by diatoms, like that which you see here. And when the sargassum is absent, it's dominated by coccolithophores. And then the epiphytes also have cryptophytes, dinoflagellates, and cyanobacteria, and fewer coccolithophores. The other thing that we found is that there are far more harmful algal bloom forming species associated with the sargassum than are found in the surrounding environment, suggesting that sargassum may be a vector for these organisms. So the relatively high productivity of sargassum is possible because of nutrients. Our seasonal data and laboratory experiments make it clear that sargassum is a nutrient cycling oasis in the middle of a nutrient deficient pelagic ocean. And those nutrients are coming from excrement from fish and other organisms that are using the sargassum as habitat, and they're coming from other places and bringing that excrement with them. And also through nitrogen fixation by sargassum epibionts. And this picture here is a conceptual diagram that shows the symbiotic epibionts, including nitrogen fixers, that basically take nitrogen out of the atmosphere and make it biologically available. And that some of that biologically available nitrogen is used by the sargassum itself, as well as some of these epibionts, but some of it also seems to be entering the water column. Recently, we've been noticing that these rates of nitrogen fixation by sargassum epiphytes is substantial. So when we look at the highest monthly rate of nitrogen fixation by the sargassum and scale it up using the biomass estimate from the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt, it's not a perfect scaling, but it's what we have to work with right now. It's basically comparable to 10% of that which is fixed monthly for fertilizers using Haber-Bosch. So that's a huge anthropogenic source of biologically available nitrogen, and also to about 9% of the monthly global nitrogen fixation. So these are massive amounts of nitrogen that's being made biologically available if this scaling is accurate, which I think it's a good estimate for now. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, it's well established that sargassum provides habitat for numerous invertebrates and fish, including many endemic species that aren't found anywhere else, as well as migratory organisms like sea turtles, fish, and pelagic birds. But we're finding that it may be supporting a whole nother food web that is planktonically based as well. So we are exploring these linkages between the different trophic levels, between the primary producers, primary consumers, and some of the tertiary and higher consumers in these systems. So again, our research is just confirming what we know. Sargassum is an important habitat, but it's also important to productivity and nutrient cycling in this pelagic ocean. And it is located mostly at the surface of the water column, kind of consolidated along the western edge. So in conclusion, there are several potential ecological conflicts at the water surface along the western edge of the Gulf Stream, including juvenile loggerhead sea turtles and sargassum mats. And there is also some indication of potential frontal conflicts based on limited marine mammal vocalizations. We have found that the Gulf Stream is relatively quiet, so introduction of noise could have a more substantial impact. And sargassum is this understudied ecosystem primary producer that plays an important habitat productivity and nutrient cycling role that we would like to explore further. It's also interesting because sargassum, you may have read in publications or heard during seminars that there's also this proliferation of sargassum down in the South Atlantic Ocean. So very interesting to understand the controls on that productivity and nutrient cycling. And we also are just identifying that there are many gaps in our knowledge about the ecology of the Gulf Stream yet to be filled. So it's an exciting place to work. In the future, we hope to continue long-term acoustic and fine-scale nutrient and primary production data collection, including experiments to learn more about sargassum's roles in energy flows, and application of larger scale regional analyses, such as satellite imagery analysis and numerical modeling to better constrain our scaling of those fine scale measurements. And to that end, we are in communication with people who are working on the new PACE satellite and providing them with data to ground truth their measurements of sargassum from the satellite images. We're also hoping to continue to refine the ecosystem service cascade model and geospatial data sets. And I didn't talk at all about Jeanette's pier and the ecological characterizations there or the ecological assessment there, but there is a lot more information about the organisms that are using that area. We just need to collect information about biofouling and or what we call colonizing organisms, and also the acoustic environment. And we're just continuing to communicate and coordinate with researchers and regulatory agencies and translate our findings into tools that can be used for decision making. As I said, there are a lot of people who I've worked with over the past 10 years. Is it 10 years? I don't know. The past, no, 6 years. So I've really enjoyed working with all of them and hope to have even more collaborators to work with maybe as a result of this seminar. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Dubbs, for that presentation. That was really interesting. So as usual, if people would like to ask any questions, you can either type it directly into the chat and I will read it aloud, or you can unmute yourself and ask it directly to Dr. Dubbs. I have a question about, do you have any plans to potentially look at any like renewable energy test sites to see the types of organisms that will be present there?
Yes. So we definitely will be doing measurements at Jeanette's Pier, and hopefully we'll be able to work at other test sites as well, or at least I think that learning from other test sites and kind of coming to consensus on how we're doing some of these measurements is really important. So that we can compare across tests, test sites and things like that, and different devices.
Okay, great, thank you. We have a question from Jack Dibb. Are there any energy projects planned or moving forward?
There are energy projects planned. So at Jeanette's Pier, we are hosting the Waves to Water Prize, which is a wave energy desalination competition. And so that's kind of like a blue economy application of marine energy, of wave energy. So that will be hosted at Jeanette's Pier in April 2022. We have tested some other devices for shorter periods of time at Jeanette's Pier. And then there are lots of collaborative projects that will hopefully come out of our new consortium, the AMEC consortium, that I don't know how much you all know about. So I don't know how much I'm supposed to talk about that.
Yeah, I believe we all know, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, AMEC is it's a new Atlantic Marine Energy Center.
Yes, and it is led by UNH, but we are a member of that consortium along with Lehigh and Stony Brook. So hopefully we'll be working together on many energy projects.
I have a follow-up question. Yeah, thanks, Lindsay, for this really nice overview presentation of all the different work you're doing around this. And I have a question that's from an engineering perspective. So you showed a conceptual model of the ecosystem, and ultimately, as an engineer, and maybe the public in general will want to know, what is the impact if I put, say, 200 megawatts of ocean turbines in this location? How many, how will I impact this species, that species? Do you think that with observations we can never get to a quantitative model, or will it have to wait until farms are actually deployed and we see what the impacts are? I mean, I'm kind of thinking along the lines of wind farms, and you couldn't really tell how many birds were going to die until you started collecting dead birds, right? That's sort of an analog, maybe.
Yeah. So I think that there are a lot of very sophisticated ocean models out there, even like paired ocean atmospheric models out there, that I think can move us in the direction of predicting what some of the impacts might be. And then you might need those actual deployments in place to, you can form some hypotheses maybe using the models. But yeah, then I think that we're not going to know what the full extent of impacts will be. But sometimes when I get really concerned about that, I think about the larger context again. I keep trying to remind myself about the larger context. We know that our energy demands are going to grow, right? We already have these huge energy demands, and we already know that we're affecting the marine environment in really substantial ways that are detrimental. We're seeing the results of increased ocean temperatures. We're seeing the results of decreased pH and what the implications across every trophic level, every ecological process are. So we have to, in some ways, take some risks to avoid those other known risks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, there's always an impact, right? You just have to try to proceed with the smallest impact possible. It also points to the need for continued environmental monitoring with any deployment to really understand better how these devices interact with the marine fauna.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Where do the turtles go, by the way? They go into the Gulf Stream and then they swim off northwest, and how do they come back? Do they understand the ocean currents that well? Do they just hitch a ride further south? Or
I think that that Kate has tracked them a little bit longer than I have, and they do seem to ride the current for a while. And then the problem with those solar PTT tags is that they're meant to come off after a certain period of time, and so we still don't know that much about where they go until they start returning to shore again. I think that there is some idea that they're in the Sargasso Sea or riding around with the sargassum for quite a while.
Okay.
All right, we have another question from Jack Dibb. What kind of conflicts do you foresee between any of the power extraction techniques and sargassum? And can you see them between marine, or you can see them between marine mammals and pelagic fishes and fishermen, but it's not so obvious for floating algae?
Yeah, so we've been doing some experiments about changes in hydrodynamics and energy levels and what that means for productivity and nutrient cycling in the sargassum, but none of them have shown that there have been substantial impacts. We've actually seen increases in nitrogen fixation as a result of energy extraction, especially. So I think that for the sargassum, we do know that when it's stagnant for a period of time, it seems to get really colonized by bacteria, and it makes it less productive and eventually will cause it to sink. So it could actually be transporting carbon from the surface ocean to the deep ocean. So if we're talking about turbines at the surface, the sargassum will be probably entrained in any sort of surface turbine, but it will also cause a problem to the surface turbines. And then if you're talking about at depth, like far below the ocean surface, then it's not clear what the impacts will be or that they will be substantial.
Great, thank you. And I might have missed this, but how thick are the sargassum mats in the water column?
So we've tried our best to do some scuba diving and snorkeling under the mats to see how far they extend. And we've seen some that seem to go 2-ish meters, but in general, it's about 1 meter depth. It depends on really the wind conditions at the surface and how much of it amasses. And that seems to push some of it underwater.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any other questions? All right, I think that is it. Thank you so much again, Dr. Dubbs, for coming and taking the time to present. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I will see everyone else on Friday for our next seminar.
Thank you. Bye.